Welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. I'm here today with Brittney Wade. Yay! Hi, Brittney.
Hi, Sydney. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining. Very excited to talk to you and what you do at Alumni Ventures. So, why don't you give us a brief overview about what you're up to?
Yes, of course. So excited to be here. So, hi, everyone. I'm Brittney Wade. I am an investor at Alumni Ventures. Prior to working in this role, I was working largely in the product space. So, I first started off actually in consulting, but then realized quickly that that was not the path I wanted to quite go down. So, pivoted to the product space where I worked first at MasterCard, essentially working on buy now, pay later or installment solutions. So, think your Klarna or your Afterpays just with MasterCard branding around it. Did that for a couple of years, absolutely loved it, but decided that I was a bit over the corporate environment. So going into business school a couple of years later, I was like, I'm really curious about startups and the impact I can have there. So quickly made a pivot over to the early stage scene, continued working in product and sort of improving early stage ideas to kind of get them from 0 to 1 and also helping them scale out to different customers. So really was able to kind of leverage that product set that I'd built at MasterCard and kind of deploy that at an earlier clip. I also did some operations work and also helped with early financing and just really fell in love with the pace and the innovation at which startups work. Going into my second year of business school, I knew I loved being an operator, but was decided that I wanted to kind of pivot to the investor side because I was having a really hard time deciding which one of the startups I was working at that I wanted to fully commit to. I kind of loved being a free agent, so I started thinking more seriously about being an investor. Um, had a great time meeting different venture funds, and then shortly thereafter learned about Alumni Ventures, got introduced to a couple of future colleagues, and the rest is history. I've been here since August of last year, so still quite the baby investor, but quickly learning so much and have seen so much already and have really enjoyed sitting in the seat and meeting so many incredible founders building such incredible things. I really feel like I'm getting a sneak peek of all the innovation that's happening across the world. So have really enjoyed being on this side and putting capital to work in very deserving founders.
That's great. And so, why don't you give us like a one-liner on what kind of deals are most interesting to you and what kind of things you're looking for?
Yeah, for sure. So Alumni Ventures is a generalist fund. So I look at a bit of everything. So the breadth is quite wide. But that being said, I have 4 areas that I personally am really interested in and have been doing a lot of work to kind of develop myself. As I mentioned before, I have a bit of a financial services background. So fintech has been an area that I've been really interested in and been able to add a lot of value already because of my working experience there. Also, healthcare. I was an athlete in college, so I've always been really interested in like wellness and health and how people can best better themselves. So healthcare, especially with the digital verticals, has always been a big area of interest for me as well. And on top of that, also climate. I think anything we can do to save the planet, I'm always fully behind, and also very typically great businesses as well. And then also rounding that out would be the mobility sector. I'm really interested. I was a former New Yorker, always interested in how people can get around and get around efficiently and without having to do it with a car or whatever the case may be.
I am learning how inefficient it is to get around in New York every day.
Yes.
That's really great. So yeah, it's really interesting that the structure of the fund is that, and for those of you who don't know, Brittany graduated from Duke, so she works for the Duke Fund, which makes a lot of sense.
Actually, Dartmouth.
Dartmouth, sorry.
We love Duke. We love Duke. Duke is great, but I am a Dartmouth
Part
girl.
out. So she graduated from Dartmouth and works for the Dartmouth Fund. So that makes, a lot of sense. And it's something that is very specialized at Alumni Ventures. And so for people who are, looking at the funds, it's also really important to kind of see what that association is, how strong those bonds are. And this is something that, of course, Brittany already knew, having going into looking into the different funds and the different opportunities. And so, being so busy as you are in business school, having to think about where your interest really lies and why, and what really ticks. And you only have about 2 years in business school, right? Yeah.
Correct.
So
Not even the full 2 years. It's like
not even
eight
full 2 years. Yeah,
months.
that's true. That's true. So in terms of this heavy scheduling and the expectations and kind of like deciding where your path is next, what would you say were like major influences in terms of the people in your life, the network that you had that really taught you really good lessons in terms of where you want to go and why, or something that just showed you this is definitely not what I.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think so. The way venture first came up for me, because candidly, I didn't really know much about venture until my second year of business school.
Most
So
people
I
don't. It's
think,
okay. It's
yeah.
not a you thing.
Yeah, I think I did not have a ton of exposure to it going into business school, and I'd heard the term but did not really know what it meant. So going into my second year, I signed up for a PE VC basics course essentially, which was like our crash course in venture, teaching you everything from what a term sheet means to like what it means to raise a seed round versus a Series C. And I started thinking to myself, this is really interesting. And then around that same time, I remember I was in Peru on a school trip and I saw a job come up for a fund that had invested in the Series D company I had spent my summer at, Trove, and the firm was Double Bottom Line Partners, DBL. And I thought to myself, oh, like let me apply. Let me just see. This could be interesting. Like I worked for their portfolio company. There could be a lot of interesting synergies here. I'm already thinking about venture. So I kind of cold applied, which I later learned throughout the course of my recruiting journey for VC is like not the best way to put in a VC application, but I didn't know that at the time, so I just went for it. And I ended up getting a first round interview and getting pretty far in the process, making it to the final rounds. Although I did not end up getting that job, I thought to myself, oh, if I was just kind of like spitballing here, like there might be something here, I might be able to do this. So then I started looking more at people that had gone directly from business school into venture, because I think part of what I've been hearing is like you need to be an operator, you need to be a banker, you need to be this or that before you can do venture. And I kept seeing people that had done it without doing those things that were quote unquote prerequisites. So I started connecting with those people directly, right? Like I talked to anyone that was in my alumni, Dartmouth or Columbia. I went to Columbia for undergrad network to really understand what their journey was. I think the Dartmouth network was particularly more helpful because I was coming out of business school. So people that I work with now, like Mira Oak, who's a close colleague of mine, and Pete Mathias, who actually works on the Green D team with me now, we're both very instrumental in sort of like talking with me early on and kind of giving me a roadmap for what it looks like to go straight from business school into venture. I think I also had the added benefit of being an operator and being able to kind of speak to the experience of like what it looks like to like work at an early stage company and like what that process and like what that day-to-day looks like. And I think that was also very helpful in terms of like getting me in the door and also kind of providing like a bit more of a unique nuanced perspective that's a bit different from I'm a banker or like I'm an ex-consultant, and being able to kind of speak directly to like the companies that they would be actually putting capital behind.
Okay, great. And so, one of the things that you touched on, which was it's something that I think a lot of people go through, is that, doing the cold outreach may not always be the best way,
Yeah.
because venture is so much about your network and is so much about building relationships. And so, kind of what was the biggest lesson that you learned from, doing the cold outreach? Yes, it works sometimes, but it is not always the best way, just because that's not the way that a lot of that venture world is used to getting information or communication and things like that. But if you are, like, let's say, new to the world, new to this world, and not new to the world, and then or kind of getting into it from a different kind of sector, I would find that that's something that is very intimidating, or very like you would feel like there's a lot of obstacles. Did you ever felt like there were a lot if you were coming out from business school and just kind of like, this is the bubble that I have right now?
Yeah, I think my mindset that whole time was just like shoot your shot. I'm a
Yeah.
big shoot your shot person. Like you can't make the basket unless you throw it at the hoop, right? So I think it was more so like not being afraid to reach out to someone. The worst they can say is no or ignore me. And then in that case, like whatever, like move on to the next. And also I think casting a wide net. So not just reaching out to one or two people and being like, oh, I did my job, but reaching out to like 10, 15, 20, 30, 35, however many. Like it took me 8 months. So I don't even know how many people I reached out to, probably in close to 100, if not over. So I think both like not being afraid to put yourself out there is a big part of it. But I think also persistence is another huge bit of it, and resilience. I would say I'm both of those things. I think you have to be to kind of want to get into a space that is like venture, because it's not something that is necessarily handed out like candy, right? And it's a bit more unstructured in terms of how to get into it than, let's say, a banking or consulting, which have very defined paths of how you get in. Like you go to the info session, you do some coffee chats, you submit a resume. It's very like formulaic. And venture just isn't quite like that. So I think it requires, a lot of resilience and persistence to know that even if you don't hit it the first time, just keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. And I think just being very observant around like the different paths that you see, like again, like I kept hearing from people, you need to go into banking or consulting, but I kept seeing people that weren't doing that. So I think also just being cognizant of other people that don't quite fit the narrative that other people are pushing to you, and being very thoughtful around like what you know to be true and versus like what you're being told is true.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
those are the
absolutely.
things I
I
would
think
say for sure.
I think that, from what you're saying, you get a lot of advice from other people, and whether or not you probably asked for it, but they just like to give it, which is what, is very natural for people to want to give advice. They're like, at least I will leave you with this. At
Yeah.
least you got this, whether or not it's relatable to anything that you're doing.
Yeah.
And so
And not all advice is good advice either, right? Like definitely pick and choose when you get your advice.
yeah, did you have any advice that was like very funny or very kind of out there? And you're like, totally not related, but thank you. I really appreciate the heart.
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think I ever heard anything that was like too crazy. Like people told me the typical things like apply for venture fellowships or apply often. No, honestly, everyone that I talked to that actually ended up getting on the phone with me and like actually speaking with me only gave me like great nuggets. Like can't think of anyone that was like go, jump off the Empire State Building to make a statement kind of deal. I mean, I think some people tried to push like be a LinkedIn like poster kind of thing, and that's
Oh,
just
okay.
my style because I think a lot of venture is like building a brand and building a personality, and like so much of that happens on LinkedIn. I knew that wasn't really true to me as a person. So
Yeah.
I think not bad advice, but advice that just wasn't really going to resonate with me the way it might resonate with someone that is already used to being like, here's my Substack on LinkedIn or read my take. I don't think I'm quite that type of person. So not bad advice, but just advice that wasn't really pertinent to me or didn't feel authentic to me. And I tried to also be very cognizant about like what is authentic to me, like what will work well for me. Because I think people can smell through BS very easily. And I think if I had started being like all of a sudden like a LinkedIn lunatic, people would have been like, what's up with Brittney? Why is she posting so much?
They're gonna think you're making commission per post.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not what I wanted them to come away with.
So I've gotten kind of weird advice. Would love to see your reactions to them. One of them is, as you know, I got my MBA in Paris, like, before I did my corporate thing and then before I did startup. Someone literally told me to get a second MBA in the place where I want to go work.
No. Oh my gosh.
I was like,
Yeah,
I've already done this.
people say silly stuff like that all the time. And it's like, be for real. Like, I'm not gonna do that. So don't even see that.
Can you imagine? Because you recently finished business school and you're like, just go do another one. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal.
I'm like, are you gonna pay for it? I would love another 2-year vacation, but like, are you ponying up some dollars?
Right, exactly. And then so, there was these like scenarios where, of course, in the process of going through applying and going through getting the different sets of interviews, and also just coming from many different backgrounds, as you don't know like what someone is looking for because all the descriptions may sound very general to you. How did you kind of decipher what was authentic to you if you didn't get to meet the team kind of just yet, or did you only kind of decide that later on?
Like authentic to me in terms of like the VC job descriptions I was seeing.
Yeah, and the team and the fit and the industry and sectors and things like that. Because I'm sure you were very open to many sectors, just kind of having done the things that you've done, right?
Yeah, I would say I was pretty open to a lot of things. I think I started with like my values because I was pretty open in terms of location. Like I knew getting into venture was pretty hard. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna just be willing to go to Timbuktu to do this job. Like I was like, I'll go anywhere and I'll be open about that. But like I think one of the things I was thinking about was definitely value. So I knew I wanted to learn a lot. So I think looking a lot at like generalist funds, which is obviously what I'm at now, but I think also thinking about funds that were really thoughtful around sort of like the impact they were having. So I think a great example is like DBL. They invest for both returns and also positive impact on the broader ecosystem. So that was like something that was a really great fit for me. Another venture fund I looked at was BBG Ventures, which is built by girls. So they only invest in female investors at the earliest stages, which is when it's so crucial to get that first capital, because otherwise it's really hard to build your business. And
Yeah.
that really resonated with me too, right? Like I think we all know that women don't receive the funding that they deserve, even less so for if you're a person of color, which for the people that can't see me, I am Black. So that's something that most I care about. And I think another fund that I just loved, just because I love her, was the Serena Ventures Fund. Also because like it's Serena Williams. Of course I
Yes.
want to work there. So I thought a lot about like my values and the things I wanted to learn and also the sectors I was interested in. So like for me, deep tech is not really my expertise. So I was not necessarily trying to go to like a quantum computing VC fund. But I think there's also a balancing act of still being open-minded. So like, yes, knew I didn't want to be at a deep tech fund, but I think also being willing to sort of like grow that skill set over time and be getting exposure to those deals is something that I think was very crucial for me to be at least open to. Because I think the other thing that you can never forecast is where the market's going to go. You know, we're in 2024 and Gen AI is a huge thing right now for people to invest in. And also so many people are building in that area. So while when I was first starting my recruitment process, ChatGPT was just taking off, I think just being open to understanding that technology and like where that will kind of lead the market from a founding and builder perspective, I think is a key thing to just be attuned to.
Absolutely. And so, it's so interesting that, you're talking about the different verticals that you had to learn and the different aspects of everything that goes into that. So in your first, X amount of time at a brand new job, of course, there's a lot of learning curves. And when it comes to VC, it's not one industry. It is many parts, many different kinds of business models. So for example, when I was at the climate studio, so I was at a venture studio that specializes in climate. It's first time doing hardware, first time doing anything that scientific.
Yes,
ChatGPT did help me break down a lot of terminology.
we
Yeah,
indeed. I love ChatGPT. I'm on it all the
right.
time.
And so, like, did you have the experience where you kind of went through that? You're like, okay, I just did a whole lab tour. Now I really need to understand all of this, all of what it means. And what steps did you take to do, new market mapping and new self-taught information about catching up with industries to know if this is the right industry for your team?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think I come across this issue largely when I'm looking at therapeutics, for example. I'm not an MD. Like by
No.
reviewing, I know, right? I definitely give doctor, but by reviewing a therapeutic, I'm sort of forced to put on my fake doctor hat and try to understand like what do clinical trials mean? What stage is this company in? Like how long will that take? How likely is FDA approval? How big is this market of disease that they're thinking about? So I think it's sometimes marrying what you know and like knowing what you know. So like I know I can understand how big a market is. I know I can understand what the margins on the business could be, but also being very attuned to what I don't know, which is like, is this a good science or not? So I think also being very cognizant of the resources at your fingertips. So at AV, we have an expert network that is very helpful in terms of like, hey, I'm not a doctor, like you are. Could you sort of help me evaluate this medical application and like whether or not this is something that it would be a good fit for this disease as a potential cure, or is this an area where there's already a lot of things on the market that are addressing this? If they are, like, what are sort of the gaps and the key differences between this solution and things that are already existing? And that's sort of like using things that are in my wheelhouse of like doing market research and like understanding the business model and like marrying that with, someone with the actual scientific medical background that can be like, yes, this therapeutic will do what it says it should do, and they are following the right process and sort of like getting this from drug discovery to clinical trials to like bring it to commercialization. So I think being very attuned to, again, what I do know and what I don't know, and sort of tapping into the resources to kind of help me bridge that gap has been really crucial for those areas where I just don't know as much, or I'm still kind of like developing key competencies or just like any sort of knowledge. Like I did not know anything about therapeutics before, but have definitely had to like learn. And I would say the same thing with even like deep tech, like looking at chips right now and having to understand like the different types of chips and like what their applications are. And again, like I can go so far with that, but also knowing where I need to kind of like loop in my teammates, or even like an expert to kind of help me better evaluate a deal.
That's really great that you have that like panel of experts because your company is big enough to be able to draw on that kind of expertise. Because I've definitely seen funds that were smaller and they had to like just scour LinkedIn to find experts and be like, which scientist can I call now? And like,
Yeah.
which doctor can I call? And I was just like, do you know any of these people?
Yes.
And so you're
Exactly.
kind of basing it off of the fact that like they don't know much about startup. They don't know
Mhm.
what it's like to be in the early stage. They know what it's like to be in that stage. And
Right.
it may or may not be relevant because there's so much in between. And for you to kind of go through, clinical trials again, and like how to do that from A to Z is a whole other different kind of support that you have to do. So yeah, definitely a huge benefit, as you've mentioned, of being part of a much bigger company and being intertwined with many different kinds of funds.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We love our AV network. We're so grateful for them. Or at least I definitely am. I'm sure everyone else is too, but I personally am. It's great that they kind of know the fund and like everything that we're kind of mandated to invest behind, and then coupling that with their expertise, I think is just a wonderful marriage. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know that when we originally met, you were new to the women's fund that is part of AV as well. So can you just kind of go over what is the difference between a female founder that is applying to your fund at Dartmouth versus the female fund?
yeah, so I think one of the great things is like they have access to receive capital from both. I think one of the great things about our fund is that because we have so many micro funds underneath the broader Alumni Ventures umbrella, there's opportunities for them to receive capital from a couple different sources. So for a great example is like the Women's Fund and Dartmouth. So let's say we have a great female founder and like Green D knows you want to put money behind it. We also can evaluate that from the Women's Fund perspective and decide to put capital behind them in that way. So they're not only getting capital from us, they're going to get more capital, which I think is
Yeah.
really, really fantastic. Because I know we talked a lot earlier about how hard it is for women to get funding. So I think that's a really great benefit to them, just being able to sort of get bigger checks early so they can sort of build what they're looking to do. I would also say the key difference for the Women's Fund is just sort of like the number of deals in which we're doing. So we do about 15, we're looking to do 15 to 20 deals with this first fund, since this is the first inception of it, versus the Green D Fund. We're much more longer established. We do many more deals than 15 to 20. But it's really the inception of this really being, we have been a long-time investor behind women and even a market leader in some respects. And we have also noticed that how well our female founders have done in our portfolio, and really wanting to put more capital behind not only them, but other women looking to do the same. So I think there's a great opportunity here, and we sort of realized that and decided, let's do a women's fund. And that's been a really great experience so far. We're still in early days. The fund only launched earlier this year, so we're still sort of in definite like formulation stage, but like quickly coming to market and hoping to deploy capital out of it into those great founders as soon as we can.
That is great. And I love the fact that you can actually apply twice. So, if you guys are going to meet an investor like Brittney, not only will you get to apply to the fund that she is, currently at and the women's fund, but also just from the conversation, seeing a whole bunch of different resources that she can refer you to see like, okay, well, because the important thing is, as we've talked about in this podcast episode so far, having a great fit and something that is authentic to you is something that is really important at the end of the day. And so you have to see your investors like a real marriage or like somebody who's going to be in your life for 7 to 10 plus years. So
Used
hopefully
to seeing this face and hearing this voice, if we right.
yeah, so this better be the face that you want us to be talking to all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so having this kind of branch out of lots of, different sources of knowledge, resources, as well as, of course, funding is extremely helpful to founders at all stages. So yeah, thank you so much, Brittney, for coming on to this episode of
Thank you
Unlocking
for
Venture
having me.
Capital. And we will see you next time.
Yes, thank you so much, Sydney. This was so fun, and I can't wait for the next episode. So exciting.